10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 388. Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 388 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This week, we are going to do our lick of the month, but this one's going to be a little bit different, so you're going to want to stick around to find out what we are exploring in our lick of the month episode. But before we jump into the show, just wanted to remind everybody this is a listener-supported podcast, which means we don't do any advertisements on the show. Instead, what we do is rely on listeners like you to support us in the form of a small monthly donation. And in return for that, you do get a PDF and audio examples for every single episode that we put out. We use the Patreon platform. So if you want to find out more, support the podcast, and get a lot of jazz education materials in return, you can go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or go to patreon.com and search up the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Quick shout out to a new member this week. Thank you to Volker for becoming a new $3 patron. And of course, to the over 350 people we have over there supporting us. Thank you so much. We could not do this without you. So if you want to be one of those people that keeps this podcast going into 400 episodes, which is coming up soon, which is crazy to think about, consider supporting us by going to patreon.com, searching for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. All right, so let's dive into it. So we are going to continue our theme of Lydian, and normally on our Lick of the Month episodes, if you are new to the podcast, we'll just take like a 2-5-1 lick or some short excerpt from a solo, and we'll talk about the concepts that are being used. But in this one, I kind of wanted to do another mini tune of the month episode where I actually wrote you a couple of choruses over a B-flat blues, and we're going to use some Lydian dominant concepts over it. But I want to talk about it real quick before I play the etude for you and all that kind of stuff, and talk about where I'm using Lydian and why I'm using Lydian. Okay, so the very first thing that we need to understand is that there are a couple of cadential points in the blues. And if you're not sure what that word means, a cadence in music is just simply an arrival point of the music. And in jazz, and probably upwards of 90% of the time in Western music, our cadence is 5-1. We hear that absolutely all the time in this music, right? 5-1. Now, the blues harnesses that 5-1 cadence in a bunch of different places. And this gives us a bunch of opportunity to use some tension and release. And what we're going to use to build interesting tension is Lydian dominant. So let's talk about where those cadential points happen in the blues. So the first one is in measure 4, leading us into measure 5. This is the one place in the blues where you could say that it kind of modulates, right? It modulates from the 1 to the 4. So if we start at the beginning of a B-flat blues, we get a 1 chord, and then that goes quickly to a 4, and then it comes back to a 1, and then that fourth bar, which is, you could think about it as just another 1 chord, but when we start to get a little bit more advanced as players, we stop thinking about this as a 1 chord, and we start thinking about it as a 5-4. And sometimes people will start to introduce tension into that to make it really, really clear that we are utilizing that measure as a 5-4. So one of the tensions we can use is sharp 11. We could start to use that Lydian dominant sound. So it changes a little bit. If we do it that way, we go 1, 2, 4, back to 1, and then, did you hear that sharp 11 enter the mix there? And that's a really nice sound. This is like sort of the next step of playing the blues, is to start to introduce some tension so that we get some forward motion from bar 4 into bar 5. So there's our first cadential point. All right, let's examine our second one. The second one happens in bar 8 going into bar 9, where we like to use the 6 chord. So if we start in bar 5, we're on the 4 chord, and then typically a lot of people go to sharp 4 diminished, and then we'll come back to 1. And here's where we use this 6 chord here. Now, the cadence is sort of built in, so 6 goes to 2, right? But what if we started to introduce some tension into that 6 chord to make it a little bit more spicy? What if we put a sharp 11 in there too? So let's try it again with the sharp 11 in there. So in bar 5, we've got a 4 chord, bar 6, bar 7. Now, so again, you could just hear that it introduces a little bit more of an interesting sound in there. Now, the other 2 cadential points are the most obvious ones. So in bar 10, going into bar 11, we have a 5 to 1. And then in bar 12, typically we'll play like a 2-5 or just a 5 going back into the top of the form. So what if we made both of those Lydian dominants as well? So now we're in bar 9, 2. Now let's turn this into a 5 sharp 11. Back to 1. And then we'll use our 5 sharp 11 again. Now, here's the thing. I'm purposefully overdoing this sharp 11 sound because that's what we're studying. And I think it's okay to overdo a concept when you are trying to get it into your playing, when you're trying to wrap your ears and brain around that sound. It's 100% okay to really lean on that. But if I were actually playing a solo, like let's say I'm doing a recording session, especially a recording session, because I know that's going to exist forever, probably not going to use sharp 11 on every cadence point, right? Probably going to start to mix in some other tension-filled sounds, and there's a whole bunch of them out there. But I do want this Lydian dominant as an option. So when I practice it, I'm just going to go super heavy on it. I'm just going to lean on it, use it everywhere I possibly can. Okay. So you might be sitting there thinking like, well, this is a little bit awkward. I actually don't like the sound of a sharp 11 chord everywhere for every cadence. And that's okay. You don't have to use it that way forever, but this is the concept that we are studying. So let's check out the entire form with those sharp 11 chords in all the cadential places. That's kind of the vibe that we are going for. So, as I mentioned, I prepared a little 2-chorus etude for you, but what I really want you to focus on is the material that I am using over those cadence points. So there's 4 of them, and I want you to just sort of immediately draw your attention there, and I've given you a bunch of examples of how you can use Lydian dominant material there. And it's something that you can steal directly or use as inspiration for your own lines or whatever you want to do is totally fine with me. But really look for those measures. I'm using triads in some of them, using scale based stuff in some of them. A lot of the structures that we have talked about are what I am trying to use in this particular example. All right, let's check out the 2 choruses over the blues. All right, so hopefully that can give you some new ideas over the blues and give you some Lydian material to work off of and eventually bring that into your own solos. So let me know if you have any questions. Remember, the PDF for this will be available on Patreon. And if you want to sign up, get this PDF and almost 400 others, then go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners or patreon.com, search for the 10-minute jazz lesson. We really appreciate your support. That really is the lifeblood of this podcast. It allows me to put more time into it, more effort into it when there is a little bit of money coming in through the door to keep this thing alive. So thank you to everybody that has chosen to support us. And if you choose to support us after this, I thank you in advance. All right, everybody, we will talk to you soon. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.